June 12, 1944. The hedgerows of Normandy. Corporal Hans Meyer, once proud of his Wehrmacht uniform, now crawled through mud as American voices shouted somewhere beyond the smoke. His rifle lay twisted in the dirt beside a burned-out half-track. The last order he heard, "Haltet die Linie," had vanished beneath the roar of artillery. He felt the ground shake as an American Sherman clanked into view, its turret turning slowly. A white flag rose from the ditch ahead, fluttering weakly in the smoke. Hans hesitated only a second before doing the same. Moments later, boots splashed through the mud around him, and a rough voice barked, "Hands up! Move it!" The Americans were young, barely older than he was. But their uniforms were clean, their weapons polished, their packs bursting with rations. They offered him water before marching him to the rear. Hans couldn't understand it. The propaganda back home had warned of brutal treatment under the Allies, yet here he was, thirsty, exhausted, but alive, and being handed a canteen. By nightfall, the captured Germans were loaded into open trucks. They passed through villages still smoldering from battle, children watching in silence as the column rumbled past. A few civilians jeered, but the Americans ignored them. At a makeshift staging camp near St. Lo, Hans received his first American meal, a tin of corned beef, white bread, and steaming coffee. He stared at the tray in disbelief. Coffee? Real coffee? Back home in Kassel, his mother hadn't tasted anything but barley substitute for years. A guard noticed his hesitation. "Eat up," he said. "Plenty more where that came from." Hans took a bite. It was salty, rich, unthinkable luxury compared to the watery soups of the Eastern Front. That night, he lay on a straw mattress inside a captured barn, the scent of diesel and bread thick in the air. Wondering what awaited them across the ocean, he would soon find out that captivity in America was nothing like he'd imagined. July 1944. New York Harbor. The Liberty ship SS Benjamin R. Milam creaked against the pier as hundreds of German prisoners stepped onto American soil for the first time. The skyline, jagged, immense, shimmering with glass and steel, rose before them like something from another world. Hans Meyer gripped the railing, staring at the Statue of Liberty through the morning haze. Around him, men murmured in disbelief. One whispered, "So this is the land we were told was collapsing under Jewish bankers?" Another laughed quietly, shaking his head. They were herded into long lines, counted, searched, and loaded onto trains marked U.S. Army transport. As the cars rolled westward, they glimpsed neat towns, children on bicycles, endless fields of wheat. No bomb craters, no ruins, just a country untouched by war. Days later, they arrived at Camp Swift, Texas, a sprawling compound surrounded by barbed wire, but nothing like the labor camps they'd imagined. The air was hot and dry, the sky enormous. Beyond the fences were rows of barracks, a mess hall, and even a small chapel. An American officer, Captain Reynolds, stood before them, reading the Geneva Convention aloud through a bullhorn. "You will be treated humanely," he said. "You will receive food, shelter, and medical care equal to that of our own soldiers. Follow the rules, and there will be no trouble." Hans exchanged glances with his comrades. Equal treatment? It sounded like mockery. Yet when the first meal was served, beef stew, potatoes, bread, and butter, the disbelief returned. The portions were generous, the food hot. One prisoner muttered, "My God, the Americans feed us like kings." Each man received a ration card and cigarettes. The Red Cross delivered mail. Some guards even joked with them in broken German. One young Texan, Private Miller, grinned and said, "You boys eat better than me." That night, as cicadas hummed outside, Hans wrote a letter on the thin POW stationery provided. "Mother, I am alive. They feed us well. We sleep in real beds. I don't understand this place." Weeks passed. The men began to notice something odd. The guards weren't cruel, the food never ran out, and there was order even in captivity. For the first time in years, Hans wasn't hungry. He wasn't afraid. But the greatest shock was yet to come. News from home that would shatter their pride and reshape how they saw everything. Autumn 1944. Camp Swift, Texas. The nights had grown cooler. Crickets sang outside the barracks, and the smell of roasted coffee drifted from the mess hall. Each week, the prisoners gathered eagerly when the mail truck arrived. Red Cross parcels, censored envelopes stamped with "Geprüft," the black ink of home. Hans waited in line, fingers trembling, until a clerk handed him an envelope with his mother's handwriting. He tore it open beneath the dim light of the barracks. "My dear son, we are alive, but the nights are terrible. The raids never stop. The bakery was hit last week, and we wait hours for bread. Your father trades cigarettes for potatoes. They say Hamburg no longer exists." Hans read the words again and again, his heart sinking. Around him, others had received similar letters, stories of hunger, ruins, and silence where cities had once stood. Private Muller whispered, "My wife says she hasn't seen a real egg in a year." Another muttered, "My brother was killed in Normandy. She writes that our town is ash." That evening, as the prisoners ate their dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, the mess hall fell silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Each man was doing the same mental comparison, their families starving in bombed-out basements, while they sat here, clean and full. Hans stared at his plate, guilt pressing heavy on his chest. "It's wrong," he said softly. "We lost everything, yet here we feast." Corporal Weber, older and weary-eyed, replied, "They want us to see this, to understand what we were fighting against." But even as he said it, there was no malice in his tone, only bewilderment. The guards treated them not as beasts, but as men. When Christmas came, an American chaplain organized a small service. The prisoners sang Stille Nacht under the Texas stars, while the guards listened quietly, some with bowed heads. The men were offered fruitcake and cocoa afterward. Later, Hans wrote in his journal, "How can this be? The enemy gives us more mercy than our own leaders ever gave us." He began to notice subtle shifts in the camp. Men who once shouted Nazi slogans now kept silent. Some volunteered for work details outside the wire, farms, sawmills, canneries, anything to feel useful. American civilians often watched them curiously, but without hatred. One farmer's wife even brought lemonade on a hot day. To the prisoners, it was unthinkable. The propaganda had painted Americans as barbaric. Yet here they were, fed, clothed, and treated with decency while their homeland burned. By winter, the disbelief had turned into quiet introspection. They began to wonder, had we been wrong all along? Spring 1945. Camp Swift. The war in Europe was ending, though the prisoners only knew it through fragments. Whispers from guards, headlines glimpsed on newspapers lining supply crates, rumors passed from camp to camp. "Berlin surrounded," one man said. "Hitler missing," said another. On May 8th, a jeep rolled through the compound with a loudspeaker. A U.S. officer's voice crackled over the static. "Attention, all prisoners of war. Germany has surrendered. The war in Europe is over." For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, hundreds of German soldiers stood in stunned silence, eyes fixed on the horizon. Some wept quietly. Others just stared at the ground, their faces blank. Years of purpose, shattered in a single sentence. That night, the mess hall served stew and cornbread. The guards allowed the men to stay up late. Captain Reynolds entered the hall, removed his cap, and said simply, "It's done, boys. You'll be going home soon." Hans couldn't eat. He sat at the table with the letter from his mother folded neatly beside his tray. The letter that spoke of hunger, of fear, of a Germany that no longer existed. He thought of his father trading cigarettes for food, of the factory smoke that once filled Kassel, now ashes. Private Miller, the guard who had once joked with them, paused by the table. "You'll see your folks again?" he said gently. Hans looked up. "What will be left of them?" he asked. Miller hesitated, then offered a small tin of coffee. "For when you do," he said. The days that followed were strangely peaceful. Without the war, the men seemed lighter. They played soccer on the dusty field, sang songs from home, even taught the guards German phrases. The Americans allowed them to listen to radio broadcasts from Europe. News of liberation, chaos, rebuilding. One afternoon, the camp projector flickered to life, showing reels of the liberated concentration camps. The men fell silent as images of skeletal prisoners and mass graves filled the wall. Some turned away. Others couldn't move. Hans felt sick. The air seemed to thicken with shame. The officer who ran the projector said nothing. He didn't have to. The film spoke for itself. That night, few could sleep. Weber whispered, "We were told we were saving Germany. But from what? From ourselves?" Hans stared at the ceiling. The pieces were coming together. The propaganda, the fear, the blind obedience. For the first time, he understood what his father's last letter had meant. "We have lost more than the war, Hans. We have lost our soul." And in that quiet Texas night, behind barbed wire that no longer felt like a prison, Hans Meyer finally realized that captivity had given him something the Reich never could: truth. December 1946, Bremerhaven, Germany. Cold rain swept across the harbor as the Liberty ship eased against the dock. After nearly 2 years in American captivity, Hans Meyer and hundreds of other POWs shuffled down the gangplank, their U.S. Army-issued coats buttoned tight against the wind. The air smelled of coal smoke and sea salt. Beyond the port lay ruins, rows of collapsed buildings, skeletal factories, and piles of twisted iron. The once proud city of Bremen had been reduced to rubble. As they stepped onto German soil, a haunting silence replaced the hum of Texas insects and the clang of camp mess halls. Hans looked around, disoriented. "So, this is what's left," he murmured. A Red Cross worker handed him a ration card and pointed toward a train that would take him south. The journey through the heart of Germany felt like traveling through a graveyard. Every station, every village bore the scars of fire. Fields lay empty, bridges broken, churches roofless. When Hans reached Kassel, he could hardly recognize it. Streets he'd once walked as a boy were now blackened craters. His family home was gone. Bombed in 1944, his mother had written. He finally found her living in a makeshift cellar with other displaced families. When she opened the door and saw him standing there, thin but alive, she dropped her pail and wept. Inside, the room smelled of smoke and boiled cabbage. There was little to eat, thin soup, dark bread. But she insisted he take the larger portion. He couldn't. "Mother," he said softly, pushing the bowl back toward her, "the Americans fed me better than this." Her eyes widened, not in anger but disbelief. better than this?" she whispered. He nodded, explaining how the guards treated them with fairness, how they were given books, even movies. She listened, eyes shining with tears, as if hearing of another planet. "So, they are not monsters," she said finally. "No," Hans replied. "They're human. Maybe more than we were." Over the next months, he tried to rebuild. The Americans distributed food packages through the Marshall Plan. The once feared enemy became the source of survival. Hans found work unloading supplies at a rebuilt rail depot, his pay coming partly in canned goods and cigarettes. At night, he wrote in a small notebook, the same one he had started in Texas. "We believed we were fighting for the future, but the future was across the ocean all along. Discipline, industry, freedom, things we were told were weaknesses, were the American strength. Their kindness was their greatest weapon." Years later, when asked about his captivity, Hans would always pause before answering. "They fed us better than our own people," he would say quietly. "And in doing so, they taught us what we had forgotten: dignity." The story of men like Hans Meyer became a quiet legacy, an unexpected bridge between enemies, forged not in victory or surrender, but in compassion. As post-war Germany rose from the ashes, thousands of former POWs carried that lesson with them. And though history remembers their battles, perhaps the greater victory was found behind barbed wire in a mess hall in Texas, over a bowl of stew that tasted like mercy. The story of the German POWs isn't just about war. It's about humanity, surviving in the unlikeliest of places. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the forgotten chapters of World War II. Every week, we bring you the real moments when soldiers, enemies, and civilians discovered what it truly meant to be human. This isn't just history, it's the memory of who we are.